The MTLB is still rolling when the first drone finds the open hatch. It is a little after 7 in the morning on the northwestern edge of Vovchansk, and the transporter has 15 men riding on its roof. The Ukrainian operator does not aim for the armor. He aims for the dark rectangle of the open troop compartment, and he flies straight into it. What happens next takes 90 seconds, and it will be watched millions of times. The more important question is not how one vehicle came apart. It is why 17 of them were sent down that road at all. Hold that image. A tractor built to tow artillery, carrying more men on its skin than inside its hull, moving in daylight toward a tree line that has cameras in it. We will come back to that tree line. First, you need to understand where this road runs and what Russia was trying to do with it at the end of September 2024. Vovchansk sits in the northeast of Ukraine in Kharkiv Oblast, close enough to the Russian border that you can walk to it. Before the full-scale invasion, it was a quiet town of around 17,000 people, split by the Vovcha River, with a chemical plant on its northern side and farmland stretching out in every direction. By the autumn of 2024, it was one of the most fought-over ruins on the entire front. In May of that year, Russian forces had crossed the border directly into the northern districts, trying to open a new axis and force Ukraine to pull reserves away from the Donbas. They took the northern half of the town. They did not take the rest. The line stabilized street by street, and it stabilized in large part because of the unit holding this sector, Ukraine's 57th Motorized Brigade, backed by drone teams that had turned the approaches into a shooting gallery. That is the frame for everything that follows. This was not a surprise Russian breakthrough into an undefended area. This was an assault into a sector that had already ground down attack after attack, held by defenders who had spent months learning every road, every crossing, every gap in the tree lines. Russian command knew that. They sent the column anyway. To understand why that decision was so costly, you have to understand the vehicle at the center of it. The MTLB is a Soviet-era multi-purpose light armored transporter. It is small, tracked, and lightly built. Its aluminum alloy hull is designed to stop rifle rounds and shell splinters, nothing more. Its original job was to haul mortars, tow anti-tank guns, and move supplies across bad ground. It was never meant to be a frontline assault vehicle. It has almost no overhead protection, a thin roof, and a large open troop bay in the back. In a war without drones, that open bay is just a way to move infantry quickly. In this war, it is a target the shape of a doorway. By late 2024, the Russian army was using MTLBs as battle taxis all along the front because it had burned through better vehicles. 2.5 years of fighting had chewed up its stocks of BMP infantry fighting vehicles, and modern armor faster than its factories could replace them. So the tractors came out of storage, and the infantry climbed on top of them, and commanders told themselves that speed would keep them alive. Get across the open ground fast enough, they reasoned, and the drones would not have time to react. It was a bet. On the morning of roughly September 30, 2024, that bet came due on a road outside the Vovchansk chemical plant. The Ukrainian side of this story starts days earlier, in the quiet work that never makes it into the viral clip: reconnaissance. The 57th's drone teams, along with the surveillance assets feeding them, had the northwestern approaches under near constant watch. Fixed-wing scout drones loitered high over the Russian rear. Cheaper quadcopters watched the near ground. Every tree line was mapped. Every likely form-up point behind the Russian lines had been noted and ranged. When you hold a sector for months, you stop reacting to the enemy and start predicting him. The operators knew which roads a mechanized push would have to use because the terrain only allowed a few. There was the chemical plant, a sprawl of industrial buildings and pipe racks on the northwestern edge of town, and there was the open farmland around it. Armor moving on Ukrainian positions from the north would funnel through a narrow band of ground. The drone teams had that band pre-registered the way an artillery unit registers a target. The Russian preparation was the mirror image. According to open-source intelligence channels tracking the sector and Russian millblogger posts from those days, forces on the Vovchansk axis had been ordered to renew the push toward the southern part of the town, to break the stalemate that had held since summer. Fresh assault companies were fed into the sector. Vehicles were pulled forward under cover of darkness. Fuel and ammunition were staged. The plan, as it can be reconstructed from what was later seen on the road, was a classic mechanized assault. mass a column, drive hard across the open ground, dismount close to the Ukrainian line and take the positions in a rush before the defenders could concentrate fire. On paper, it is a doctrine older than any man in the column. Mass and speed. Hit 1 point harder than the enemy can respond. It worked for Soviet armies for decades. The problem is that the doctrine assumes the enemy cannot see you until you are close, and cannot hit you accurately until you are closer. In the airspace over Vovchansk in the autumn of 2024, both of those assumptions were dead. The defenders could see the column form up. They could see it start to move, and they could reach out and touch any vehicle in it from kilometers away, one drone at a time, for a few $100s a strike. Here is the detail that turns a routine assault into a catastrophe. The infantry rode on top. An MTLB can carry men inside, but the inside is cramped and slow to unload. And when a vehicle strikes a mine, the men inside are trapped. So Russian assault troops across the front had taken to riding topside, clinging to the hull, on the theory that if the vehicle hit a mine, they could be thrown clear rather than sealed in. Against mines, maybe. Against a drone that flies down at them from above, riding on the roof is the single worst place a soldier can be. There is no armor overhead because they are the top of the vehicle. A grenade dropped from 40 meters or a quadcopter flown straight into the group finds flesh. It's not metals. The column that pushed toward the chemical plant carried, by Ukrainian Brigade reporting, well over 100 infantry riding on the outside of its vehicles. Roughly 17 MTLBs and 3 tanks, men stacked on the transporters like passengers on an overloaded bus. Picture the last quiet minutes before it began. Somewhere behind the Russian line, an officer gave the order to move. Engines that had been idling came up to power. The tracks bit into churned earth. The column rolled out of its assembly area and onto the approach, and the men on top hunched down against the cold in the ride and told themselves it would be quick. In a Ukrainian dugout a few kilometers away, an operator with a withheld call sign sat in front of a screen, goggles on, a small quadcopter armed and waiting on a launch board beside the position. His scout feed showed the column the moment it cleared the tree line. He did not rush. He watched it commit to the open ground, watched it string out along the road with nowhere to hide, and then he reached for the first drone. The first FPV crossed into the engagement area low and fast, a battery-powered quadcopter carrying a shaped charge, the standard tactical weapon of this war. It is not a precision-guided missile. It is a man flying a racing drone by hand through a camera at 70 or 80 kilometers per hour, threading it toward a moving target while the target's crew try to shoot it down or drive out from under it. Every strike is a piloting problem solved in real time. And on this morning, the pilots had the easiest problem they would ever be handed. A slow column in the open with no overhead cover and men in the worst possible position. But easy is not the same as automatic. Somebody still had to fly each one in. That part came next. The lead MTLB is the one from the opening. It is moving at the pace of a fast jog, its troop bay open, 15 men riding the hull. The operator brings the drone in from behind and above, matches its speed and puts it through the open hatch. The charge detonates inside the compartment, inside the thin aluminum box, and the blast has nowhere to go but through the vehicle and the men on it. The transporter slews off the road. The men who were on top are gone from the roof. Some are thrown clear and do not move. A few get up and run. The vehicle burns. In the goggles, it is over in a heartbeat, one clean impact and a rising column of smoke, and the operator is already calling for the next drone. This is where the assault should have stopped and did not. A competent response to a first vehicle loss is to halt, scatter, get the infantry off the vehicles and into cover, and pull the column back out of the beaten zone. That is hard to do under fire, with radios jammed, with a dozen vehicles bunched on a single road, and with junior commanders who cannot see the whole picture. So the column kept going. It bunched up behind the burning lead vehicle. Drivers tried to steer around the wreck and pushed off the road into softer ground. Men jumped down and ran in the open. And every one of those reactions handed the drone teams another target, exactly where they had expected the targets to be. The second and third strikes came fast. Another transporter took a drone into its open bay and stopped dead. A third caught a hit near the engine deck and began to smoke. The operators were not working alone. Multiple crews were flying at once, cycling drones off the launch boards as fast as they could arm them, each crew taking a vehicle, calling their hits over the net, so no two drones wasted themselves on the same wreck. Behind them, resupply runners kept the board stocked. This is the part the viral clip never shows. Not one hero pilot but a small factory of them, a production line of strikes, each drone costing a few $100s, each vehicle it ended costing the Russian army 100 times that and more. 10 minutes into the engagement, the shape of it was already decided. The column was no longer a column. It was a line of individual vehicles, some burning. Some stopped, a few still trying to move, strung out across open ground with infantry scattered around them in ones and twos. The tanks were there too, 3 of them heavier, better protected, harder for a small FPV to finish. A quadcopter with a shaped charge can damage a modern tank, can blow a track, can start a fire if it hits the right spot, but a T-series tank is a far tougher problem than an aluminum tractor. The drone teams knew it. They went after the transporters first because the transporters carried the infantry, and the infantry were the whole point of the assault. Break the men and the armor has nothing to escort. One of the 3 tanks was hit and stopped. The other 2 turned back. According to Ukrainian Brigade accounts, the tanks that survived did so by running, not by fighting. Now the drones went hunting the men. This is the grim arithmetic of a broken mechanized assault, and it needs to be said plainly without either flinching or dwelling. The infantry who had ridden the transporters were now on foot in open farmland, hundreds of meters from any cover, with quadcopters overhead. Some of those drones carried shaped charges for vehicles. Others were the drop type, small quadcopters rigged to release a grenade or a modified munition on the target below and fly home to be reloaded. Over the next stretch of the engagement, the drop drones worked the scattered infantry while the FPVs finished the vehicles. The men had nowhere to go. The tree lines that offered cover were the same tree lines the defenders held. The open ground offered speed and nothing else, and a man on foot cannot outrun a drone. The dismounted infantry were caught in the open and did not survive it in numbers. The Russian assault force that had climbed onto those transporters at dawn had within the hour largely ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Every soldier on those vehicles was a contract soldier who had chosen the Ukraine front, drawn by signing bonuses and combat pay to cross a border that was not his to cross. They rode toward a town in another country on the theory that speed would save them. The theory was wrong. The road held the line. That is the climax the clip captures. Now the accounting, because the numbers are where this story gets both impressive and complicated, and where an honest telling has to slow down. The claim, as reported by the 57th Brigade and echoed in Ukrainian General Staff dailies, is stark. Of the roughly 17 MTLBs in the column, 16 were destroyed. Of the 3 tanks, 1 was destroyed. The infantry losses were put at over 100. If those figures are exact, this was one of the most lopsided armor engagements of the entire war. An entire reinforced mechanized assault erased for the cost of a few dozen drones, none of which cost more than a used motorcycle. But you should know exactly what kind of number that is before you repeat it. 16 of 17 is a one-sided figure. It comes from the unit that did the destroying and from the national command that has every reason to publicize a clean victory. That does not make it false. It makes it unconfirmed. When independent open-source analysts sat down with the released drone footage and did the patient work of geolocation, matching each burning vehicle to a specific point on the map, making sure 2 clips were not showing the same wreck from 2 angles, they were able to firmly confirm damage or destruction to at least 7 of the MTLBs. 7 visually, beyond argument. The gap between 7 confirmed and 16 claimed is not evidence of a lie. It is the normal gap between what a camera proves and what a unit reports, because not every strike gets filmed, not every wreck gets geolocated, and footage from a chaotic hour never captures everything. The honest position is the one the best analysts took. At least 7 MTLBs confirmed destroyed on camera, the brigade claiming 16, and the truth almost certainly somewhere in that range, closer to catastrophic than to modest. The assault was broken. That much every side agrees on. Why does the difference matter if the outcome was a Russian disaster either way? It matters because credibility is the only currency a documentary channel has. A viewer who goes and checks will find the 7 confirmed figure and the 16 claimed figure, and if we had told you 16 was proven, we would have lied to you. We are not going to do that. 7 confirmed on film up to 16 claimed by the brigade, an assault destroyed before it reached the line. Those are the facts in that order. What did the destruction actually cost Russia? Beyond the vehicles, start with the machines. An MTLB is not an expensive vehicle by armor standards. It is an old tractor, but it is a vehicle the Russian army cannot easily replace. because it is spending them faster than storage can supply them. Every transporter turned to scrap on that road is one fewer battle taxi for the next assault, and the next assault still has to happen because the objective did not move. The tank that was destroyed is worth a couple of $1 million and years of production time. But the real loss was not metal. It was men, and specifically it was trained assault infantry, the hardest thing in the Russian order of battle to regenerate. You can pull an MTLB out of a storage yard. You cannot pull an experienced assault company out of a storage yard. The company that rode those transporters was gone, and the sector it was meant to break was still held by the same brigade that had held it all summer. Intercepted radio chatter on Russian nets in these situations tells the same story every time, and the Vovchansk axis was no different. Open-source channels that monitor Russian frequencies describe the familiar pattern in the hours around such assaults. Calls for vehicles that would not answer, requests to evacuate wounded from open ground that no one could safely reach, commanders demanding to know why a column that had reported moving on schedule had simply stopped transmitting. A mechanized assault that fails in the open does not fail quietly. It fails as a slow cascade of unanswered calls. And somewhere up the chain, an officer has to write a report explaining where a reinforced company went. The report will not use the word tractor. There is a strategic point buried in that failure, and it is the reason this engagement circulated far beyond the usual audience. Vovchansk was supposed to be Russia's second front, the Kharkiv gamble that would stretch Ukraine thin. Instead, it became a place where Russia fed vehicles and men into a narrow band of ground that the defenders had turned into a killing floor, one drone at a time. The math is brutal for the attacker. A tactical FPV costs a few $100s. The vehicle it destroys costs orders of magnitude more, and the trained crew and infantry it destroys cannot be bought at any price. When one side can trade a few $100s for battle taxi and its passengers, and the other side has to keep sending battle taxis because the objective has not moved, the exchange rate wins the sector even when the map does not change. That is what a lot of viewers who shared the clip felt without being able to name it. They were watching the economics of the war, not just an explosion. Remember the open bay from the very first vehicle, the dark rectangle the operator flew his drone straight into. That single design fact, infantry riding the outside of a lightly armored tractor, a troop compartment open to the sky, is the whole engagement in miniature. Russian commanders knew by the autumn of 2024 that top-riding infantry were desperately vulnerable to drones. They sent them anyway, because they had run short of anything better and the objective still had to be taken by somebody. Vovchansk did not create that vulnerability. It exposed it on film in 90-second increments, until a reinforced assault company had been erased from a road it should never have been driven down. Return finally to the tree line we started with, the one with cameras in it. Before the summer of 2024, the ground north of that tree line could carry a Russian mechanized push with a real chance of reaching the Ukrainian line. By the end of September, it could not. The band of open farmland around the chemical plant had become a place where armor went to die. Watched from above every hour of daylight, pre-ranged, pre-mapped, waiting. The defenders did not push the front forward that morning. They did something quieter and, for Russia, worse. They made a road unusable. Every commander who plans the next assault on Vovchansk now has to solve the same problem the last one failed to solve, with fewer transporters and fewer experienced men than before. The clip will be watched millions more times, and most of the people watching will remember the explosions. The 57th's operators will remember something duller and more important, that the hour of work was mostly the days of watching that came before it, and that the road is still theirs. 17 transporters and 3 tanks went down that road toward the chemical plant at dawn. What came back was 2 tanks, running. The rest of the answer to why they were ever sent belongs to the officer who has to write the report, and he is running out of ways to spell it.